All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This is the September program for Sierra Club Middle Tennessee. And we are going to be talking today about reducing your family's exposure to toxic substances. And our presenter tonight is Dr. Robert Wingfield, PhD. He is a professor at Fisk University and will be telling us quite a lot about various toxins that surround us every day and how we can detect them and understand what the dangers are from them. So tonight's program is approximately an hour. It'll probably be an hour and a half. We are going to have a brief introduction of Sierra Club. We also talk about County of the Month. Every month we choose a county in Tennessee to give some details on. We ask that everyone turn their mics off during the presentation. We are going to try to post all the links that are stated in the presentation, though they will be in the chat box. So I suggest that you just copy them and put them in a Word document or a text document, and then you can review them later after the presentation. They're very informative. I'm sure you will get even more information about this subject later on. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation, so hold all your questions until after Dr. Winfield's presentation is over, and then there will be plenty of opportunities to ask any questions you want. You can, if you are better at just thinking about them, then and there, you may want to just type them in the chat, and then we'll bring them up at the end of his presentation. Okay? All right, so let's get started. Brief introduction of the Sierra Club, specifically in Middle Tennessee. All right, so Sierra Club as a whole has been around since 1892. There are approximately 3.8 million members around the country, and they all support and defend everyone's right to a healthy world. Middle Tennessee Group has around 3,309 members, and we cover all of these 29 counties right here. We host group hikes and outings. Of course, those are on hold. They continue to stay on hold because the COVID numbers continue to go up. When that starts balancing out, and we get approval then from the national office, then we'll start opening those up again. We provide environmental education program like this one. We work with a variety of conservation issues at the local, state-wide, and national levels, and we try to influence legislation and environmental policies. We have some very smart lawyers and environmentalists that work on a regular basis to support us. We also take an active role in addressing conservation issues by getting people involved. We try to bring them, we try to inform them when there are public forums so that they can be part of that conversation. Here are some links to get more information about the Middle Tennessee Group. I will post that in just a little bit. I'll put them all in the chat, and then you can just copy them and befriend us, okay? Right, volunteer opportunities. We do have some volunteer opportunities, and and they really are opportunities for you. They allow you to be part of this conversation about climate change. I'm so honored to be able to do these presentations. I get to learn something, and I know that everybody who watches these presentations get to learn something to help the environment. So if you want to be part of our team, do some research, help us with themes and presenters, marketing, let us know. There's a link at the bottom. We're also eventually, whenever these COVID numbers go down, we will be an in-person monthly program. So we need some assistance for that. So every month we have 29 counties, and we try to encourage people to, well, all we're trying to do is shine a light on one county a month so we know a little bit more about our entire area that we assist. So this month we're going to talk about Sumner County. Sumner County has a population of 195,000 people, which is approximately 340 people per square mile. It is located in this northern section, northern central part of Tennessee. And as you can see here, this is the terrain. So this is the northern central section or basin. It's called the Nashville Basin or Central Basin. So it's located at the very northern part of that, and it's also part of the northern section of the Highlands. It is primarily limestone. There are 42 caves. There are 7 mines, which are oil shale, uranium, iron, and magnesium. There is a very large lake there called Old Hickory. Love that lake. It's beautiful, and a lot of people go boating and sailing on that lake. Red River Lake feeds into that. The area is about 543 square miles. It's approximately 2.5% water, which I think is the highest amount of water in any county that we've covered already. So the Old Hickory Lake is very large and a big part of that county. Some of the county was established in 1786, not long after the Revolutionary War. The county seat is Gallatin, and then Goodlettsville, Hendersonville, Millersville, Mitchellville, Portland, Westmoreland, and White House are all various towns. Some are fairly large, some are very small in that community. Sumner County is considered part of the Nashville metropolitan area. Okay. All right, so here's some pictures. This is Gallatin. This is White House. And then this is Old Hickory, the lake. If you ever get a chance, please head up there. It's really beautiful. Here are the various parks, and this is just a map of the region. Bledsoe Creek State Park, Cragfont State Historic Site, Gallatin Steam Plant Wildlife Management Area, and then the Old Hickory Lock and Dam, which I love to go to, and then the Rock Castle State Historic Site and Taylor Hollow State Natural Area, and the Wynwood State Historic Site. So please take a chance and take some time, go out there. I'll actually post these also out on the chat so you can grab them and explore Sumner County. All right. Great. So let's talk about reducing your family's exposure to toxic substances. Our presenter tonight is Dr. Robert Wingfield. He is a doctor at, he's a professor of chemistry at Fisk University. He is also the director of the Fisk Community Environmental Toxins Awareness Program. He is the creator of a family and community emergency preparedness and resiliency plan addressing environmental hazards in our communities. He is also an executive committee member of the Sierra Club of Middle Tennessee group. So we are so honored to have him as part of, giving a presentation about a field that he is extremely knowledgeable about. So please welcome Dr. Robert Wingfield.
Okay, Stephanie, can you see my slides clearly?
I can see it fine. Yes.
Okay, just a point of personal privilege. I noticed on the phone on this call is a Rita Harris. Is that Rita from Memphis? Are you there, Rita?
Hello, Dr. Wingfield. How are you? Yes, it is.
Oh,
The
wow.
Rita Harris that is your friend, and we have not talked in ages.
It's so good to hear your voice.
Well, I didn't want to miss this program. I'm so proud to know that you with the Middle Tennessee group, and I wouldn't miss your presentation for the world tonight.
Ah,
Forgive me, Tamara, for being off. I'm a little bit under the weather, and I was actually eating.
okay, okay. But folks, you gotta know, I mean, Rita is truly environmental justice warrior. She's been fighting environmental justice issues for years, and I had the pleasure of visiting some of her workshops there in Memphis. And I just have to take my hat off to you, Rita, for all the work that you've done over the years.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, so tonight, we will address this topic of reducing your family's exposure to toxic chemicals at home, at work, and at play. All right. So an idea of what we'll attempt to cover here, we'll review the concept of environmental health and health equity, the Healthy People 2030 environmental health objectives, discuss relevant global sustainability concerns and principles of environmental justice, review how the US EPA toxic release inventory program can inform the discussion, identify key toxics of concern, their sources and routes of exposure, and toxic use reduction. Looking also indoors at indoor air health concerns, lead and mercury pollution, impact of fossil fuels and air toxics, health impacts of climate change, and try to identify things that link all of these together. The key focus is on protecting and sustaining the environmental health of our families and our communities. Key concepts: healthy homes, healthy workplaces, healthy communities, resilient and sustainable communities. Environmental health consists of preventing or controlling disease, injury, and disability related to the interactions between people and their environment. The reality is that more than 12 million people around the world die every year because they live or work in unhealthy environments. Now, nationally, the Healthy People 2030 focuses on reducing people's exposure to harmful pollutants in air, water, soil, food, and material in homes and workplaces. Environmental pollutants, as we all know, can cause health problems like respiratory disease, heart disease, and some types of cancer. And it's true that people who have been had these exposures and developed these problems found themselves at greatest risk when this COVID epidemic began to spread throughout the country and throughout the world. So it says that there is some merit in terms of protecting the health of all of our populations. People with low incomes are more likely to live in polluted areas and have unsafe drinking water. And children and pregnant women are at higher risk of health problems related to pollution. And environmental health must then address the societal and the environmental factors that increase the likelihood of exposure and disease. So it's very important that we look at the social and economic and environmental factors that affect the quality of people's lives. What I always go back to is that we really want to achieve health equity within our communities. Health equity is achieved when every person has the opportunity to attain his or her full health potential, and no one is disadvantaged from achieving this potential because of social position or other socially determined circumstance. Now, looking at the Healthy 2030 environmental objectives, two of those are to reduce the amount of toxic pollutants released into the environment and reduce the number of days people are exposed to unhealthy air. And we see that, in terms of this, the toxic releases inventory, which is managed by the EPA is a useful tool and something that, I've been involved in following over the last 30 years, because here in Tennessee, I remember in the 90s, the goal was to significantly reduce our release of toxic materials in this state by 2000. So this is a battle that's been going on a long time here within the state. TRI tracks the management of certain toxic chemicals that may pose a threat to human health and environment. In general, this program covers chemicals that cause cancer or other chronic human health effects, significant adverse acute human health effects, and significant adverse environmental effects. Tennessee has gotten better over the years, because I remember we first got in this battle in the 90s. Tennessee ranked 3rd in terms of the worst states in terms of the amount of toxic releases. Right now, in the latest reporting in 2019, we've moved down through notches to 9th, which is an improvement. But if you look at these numbers, we still got a long way to go, because in 2019, the total on-site releases was greater than 70 million pounds of toxic material. 22.5 million pounds were released to the air, and almost 3 million pounds were released to water. In terms of mercury, it was 13,307 pounds released, and with lead, that was like 2.5 million pounds released. And you can see on the map that we got TRI facilities all over the state. So we got work to do. If you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and what I'll be doing throughout this presentation is connecting these principles of environmental justice, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and Healthy People 2030. And I love these UN Sustainable Development Goals because they're truly global, and they match what we're trying to do here within the United States and in Tennessee. So here, goal 3 is that by 2030, substantially reduce the number of deaths and illnesses from hazardous chemicals and air, water, and soil pollution and contamination. So this is a global issue. And as I indicated, and Rita's been a part of this fight for environmental justice. And environmental justice is the fair treatment of people of all races, incomes, and cultures with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, and their meaningful involvement in the decision-making processes of the government. So this is very important because environmental injustices have been prevalent for some time and still are prevalent today. In 1991, they had the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, and they came up with several principles of environmental justice, which is still very real today. Principle 4 called for universal protection from nuclear testing, extraction, production, and disposal of toxic hazardous waste and poisons, and nuclear testing that threaten the fundamental right to clean air, land, water, and food. And then number 6 demanded the cessation of the production of all toxics, hazardous waste, and radioactive material, and that all past and current producers be held strictly accountable to the people for detoxification and containment at the point of production. And here is, I understand this is something that showed up in Sierra Club work for the last few years, and this is Tar Creek, a Superfund site, and this is a typical sign that you'd see at a Superfund site. This is a Superfund site here in Seattle. All right, I had the pleasure of my first summer faculty internship was working at the Ashtabula Superfund site outside of Cleveland. Okay. That was my introduction to environmental science at the time. The goal was to develop a computer model to do multimedia modeling of cleanup of that site. So you can tell how long ago that was, 1986. We have to recognize this important report that came out in 2007, Toxic Waste and Race. It cataloged what had happened in the 20 years since the report, 1987. And Robert Bullock, Paul Mohar, Robin Saha, and Beverly Wright did an excellent job here. And they just made it clear that racial disparities in the distribution of hazardous waste are greater than previously reported. In fact, the new methods they were using showed that people of color make up the majority of those living in host neighborhoods within 3 kilometers of the nation's hazardous waste facilities. All right, and this is something where I personally got involved with. And this is a picture here of Sheila Hope Alstead at her contaminated family well in Dixon County, Tennessee. The reality is that adjacent to their family property was a dump where trichloroethylene had been dumped. All right, that was from a automotive parts cleaning operation. And that migrated by contaminated groundwater and runoff into their groundwater and contaminated the water in their well. The hard part of it is that the EPA and TDEC knew that some of it was there, and they said the levels were so low it wasn't an issue, so allowed the Hope family for 10 years use, shower, cook, and drink this contaminated water. The end result was, family got sick. Sheila had 2 bouts with breast cancer. Her brother ended up with a compromised immune system, and her father actually died of cancer. And I attended his funeral, and I said, wow, environmental injustice is real because it kills people. And so here, Sheila had said, I never heard of environmental racism until I was a victim of it. It's sickening that this is going on in America. So they had to fight for years to try to get some compensation for all of this damage to their family. And it was an uphill battle. So overall, we don't have sustainable neighborhoods and society. We got to reduce consumption, energy uses, pollution, and waste. Some of the key compounds of concern are some that we refer to as PBTs, persistent bioaccumulative toxic things. Those are things that hang around in the environment for a long time. They're toxic and they move up the food chain. So things like the lead, mercury, arsenic, PCB, dioxins, DDT, these are things that have been around for a while. We moved away from the chlorinated hydrocarbons as pesticides like DDT and chloridane to the organophosphorus pesticides. The organophosphorus pesticides have a shorter lifetime in the environment than the chlorinated hydrocarbons, but they're more powerful and more toxic. And clearly, these toxins include things like radon, which comes from underground and can seep into your homes. And there is, underground sources within several parts of Tennessee. All right. Some of the one here is the ATSDR substance priority list. These are compounds that are put on this list because of the prioritization done by ATSDR based on their frequency, toxicity, and potential for human exposure at NPL sites. So back in the early part of 2000, when we were preparing environmental justice strategic plan for the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, I had a chance to visit the site there in Jackson and see this real Superfund site where people who live downhill from it or worried whether or not they could plant, crops and gardens down here from a Superfund site. Okay, so looking at this priority list, you see arsenic, lead, mercury, vinyl chlorinated, vinyl chloride, and PCBs, etc. Now, things, continuing to emerge. You have these fire retardants like the polybrominated diphenyl ethers that are showing up everywhere. They're perfluorinated, alkylated substances are really starting to be a problem. These are the materials used in firefighting foams and also used as material in developing non-stick coatings for household pots and pans and skillets, etc. The waste pharmaceuticals and personal care products have been detected in source water. And fracking is no friend of the environment either, because it has contaminated groundwater and people's water supply. And phthalates using for plastic softener has been an issue, and endocrine disruptors have been an issue. These PFAS, polyfluorinated, alkosulfonated species have been shown to have a negative impact on laboratory animals, and it's believed the findings are limited, but it's coming out that they can have impacts on humans, like low infant birth weights, effects on the immune system, cancer, thyroid hormone disruption, and these things are showing up everywhere. And EPA is now taking action to address these materials in source water. We must be aware of the routes of exposure here to these toxic materials: inhalation, ingestion, skin, eye contact, and injection. So exposure is a science within itself. And it's significant enough just to focus on reducing exposure, because once you are exposed, the compound gets in the body, and then you have a whole list of health issues that you have to deal with. So exposure is a science within itself. That's something I learned during my sabbatical at the US EPA lab in North Carolina, there at Research Triangle Park. And here's what looks like we're exposed to: a whole ton of pollutants. And this fourth national report on exposure to environmental chemicals, the formal report was 2015, but there have been a lot of updated tables. And this is put out by the CDC. And it is amazing. They've found either these compounds are metabolites in human urine or blood for people who they've been following with this Ian Haynes survey. So you can see things like these pesticides can have an impact on various organs. One thing that we were looking at then was the effect on the CNS, all right? So clearly you see cardiovascular effects from pesticides, and you see other organs effect. Particulate matter, we usually worry about respiratory impacts, but cardiovascular impacts are significant from this very fine particulate matter. We got to protect workers because people need jobs, and they need safe workplaces to work. And environmental justice, Rule 8, Principles of Environmental Justice. And I'm happy to say that, I'm now in the Midwest Consortium working with the young lady who proposed this. I'll mention her name, Donnell Wilkins, a good friend of mine. But she was at that conference of people of color when they put these together. And here is that environmental justice affirms the right of all workers to a safe and healthy work environment without being forced to choose between an unsafe livelihood and unemployment. It also affirms the right of those who work at home to be free from environmental hazards. And this can be a real issue globally, because you see some of these companies that show up in some of these undeveloped areas offering people jobs, giving them jobs working where they'll be exposed to a lot of hazardous material. So here, this environmental justice principle addresses that issue. The UN addressed this too by coming up with this program for sustainable consumption and production. And the essence of this program is you get toxic out of commerce this way, because even at the design phase for designing materials and substances, you eliminate toxics. So toxics are eliminated at the design phase, in the production phase, in transportation phase, in the use phase, and the disposal phase. So, I've summed this up. We just need to remove all toxic substances from commerce. And toxic use reduction methods have evolved and are really useful, because here you want to substitute a non-toxic, a less toxic chemical for one that is toxic. You don't replace hazardous chemicals with one that are less harmful in the design of a product, its packaging. And here is this hierarchy controls, and you can use this a lot of ways. We use this in just dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic. There we couldn't address elimination or substitution, but we found that engineering controls in terms of preventing the use of the spread of COVID was important, like the plexiglass shields they put in front of cashiers, et cetera. Administrative controls, which controls how people work, and then of course PPE, personal protective equipment. But you see at the very top of this hierarchy is elimination and substitution. So dealing with toxic substances, we can work at the top and eliminate them or substitute for these toxic substances by using less toxic substances. And I must say that here in Tennessee, with some of the work that's been spearheaded by TDEC over the last 30 years, there's been some efforts to working with industry to create more green industries, reducing the use of and exposure to toxic materials. And one way to do it is to do an alternative assessment. And this is where you go through a process of coming up with alternatives that are better and less toxic than ones that are currently in use. And one of the things I enjoyed having a chance to do was spend time at UMass Lowell, where the Toxic Use Reduction Institute is in Massachusetts. And this is funded and supported by the state of Massachusetts. And they've been major players in reducing the use and exposure of toxic materials in Massachusetts. And they have now recommended that these PFASs be added to the list of toxics or hazardous substances for the state of Massachusetts. So my sister, who lives in the city of Natick, is facing some water restrictions because of the level of PFASs that are in the source water in their city. All right. EPA has moved forward with pushing for environmentally preferred products. One of the things that this TURI came up with was some replacements for dry cleaner fluid, that tetrachloroethylene, which, if you follow the White Way Cleaners episode here in the heart of Nashville, they existed for years and contaminated the groundwater there with perchlorinated tetrachloroethylene dry cleaner fluid. So one of the things that TURI has done is to come up with some aqueous-based dry cleaning fluid, but the problem is getting, vendors to use that. So that's just an example of, a substitute toxic material with a less toxic material. And EPA has generated some greener products and services labeling that can be used. You can go on the EPA site and you can find some of these greener products and services. This fit now, what we see with this healthy 2030 environmental health objectives to reduce emergency department visits for children under 5 years with asthma, reduce blood lead levels in children aged 1 to 5 years, and reduce exposure to mercury in children. So you see, a young person out, gathering some fruit from, vines, etc., like people do. They go out and they, pick berries, etc. So you got to be careful and avoid pesticide exposure. I have the baby here because it's been shown that ladies who think they may get pregnant sometime in the near future have to avoid preconception exposure to toxic materials and clearly avoid exposure to toxic materials while you're carrying the child. In this West Harlem environmental group, where Peggy Shepard is a leader there, they've been documenting exposure to diesel exhaust, and they've actually found some remnants of that those diesel exhaust in the umbilical cords of people carrying babies. And so of course something like that can lead to low birth weights, etc. All right. So we've got to keep common household pesticides out of children's reach, period. You see here several of them, and these young toddlers are very adventurous, so we got to work on making sure insect repellents, rat and other rodent poison, weed killers, all of these are kept out of their reach. We do know that if you're able to do some organic farming and use less pesticides, that is great, because one of the issues we do have is pesticides on farm products. And here is one solution: is washing your fresh fruits and vegetables and teaching kids about that. That is important. Also, you want to reduce asthma triggers in your home. This is things like nitrogen dioxide, secondhand smoke, cockroaches and other pests, chemical irritants, dust mites, mold, pet dander. All of these can be asthma triggers. As I said in the outset, we want to reduce the number of young kids that have to go to the hospital because their asthma is flying up. And here is a discussion on the EPA site about dust mites. So, doing a good job of controlling the dust in your house would reduce the dust mites and reduce the source of asthma triggers. Lead is a big issue. The older houses before 78 clearly had lead in the paint. Lead has been shown in drinking water from lead contaminated pipes. There's lead in food, some cosmetics, some medicines, lead in the soil. There's lead in some consumer products. Some of the toys that have been imported to the United States may have coatings on them that have lead in them. So that has been an issue in some cases. And it's interesting in terms of medicine, some of the folk remedies that have been brought in from other countries may have lead in them. The first step in prevention of lead is primary prevention as removal of lead hazards from the environment before a child is lead exposed. And it's noted that you should check the conditions of school and child care facilities also. Secondary prevention includes blood lead testing and follow-up care and referral. So as you can see from these Healthy People 2030 guidelines, they want to lower the action level in kids' blood in terms of levels of lead. You've seen over the years it fall from 10 micrograms per deciliter to 5, and it'd be nice to lower that to an even lower level, because any lead in a child's body is bad. Okay. So this fits in with, now we have the UN Sustainable Development Goals about management of water and sanitation, Goal 6, and clean energy, Goal 7. So in terms of water, we just talked about the problem in Flint, which we all know about, and it was really bad because people for years had to carry out all of their bathing, cooking, and everything with bottled water. So you're a mother with 4 kids, and you got to take care of all their needs with bottled water. And I've been to Flint. I've seen that, up close and personal. And it was all because they failed to put some corrosion inhibitors in the drinking water when they switched the water from Lake Huron water to Flint River water to save money. So it resulted in kids with some elevated lead levels. We can say Chicago has a plan to remove lead from their pipes, and we have to tip our hats to Newark. They've taught America a lesson. The mayor there has led the city in getting the funding they need to replace most of the lead service pipes, even those on private property, and they found a way to legally do that. And they also found a way to hire local people to help in that effort. Exposure to mercury is an issue, and we know burning all these fossil fuels releases mercury into the air, and it settles in the soil and the water. And one of the greatest ways that we get exposed to it is through eating fish from contaminated sources. So you need to check, the Tennessee fish advisories before you go and fish in these what looks like enticing streams. I would say you definitely don't want to be fishing in the Mississippi River outside of Memphis. If you look at that advisory, no. But it's a lot of other sites that may look tempting, but you don't want to fish there because the fish have significant toxins in them. So to minimize your exposure to mercury, mainly eat types of fish and shellfish low in mercury, and limit your consumption of types of fish that typically have higher levels of mercury. Use products that are mercury-free, and be careful handling containers and products that contain mercury. So again, we want to push for clean and affordable energy, like shown here, the wind turbines, because we all know of the negative environmental impacts of fossil fuels, including the solid waste from burning coal, and how the workers were negatively impacted with their health when they tried to clean up the coal ash here in Tennessee. Urban air toxic is an issue. And again, low-income neighborhoods, tribal populations, and communities of color that live in urban areas may be disproportionately exposed to air pollution. So we have microenvironments where these impacted people live that may have higher level of urban toxics than other areas of the city. And EPA has on their site a list of the 30 key urban air toxics. So you can check there and see that. We need to maintain, we have clean water and sanitation. And this just shows all the way that groundwater can be contaminated, just as we saw occur in Dixon County, Tennessee. 50% of the people in the nation live off of groundwater. So therefore, it's very important. Memphis, for example, their major source of drinking water is groundwater. So it's very important that we protect groundwater. And as I said, Whiteway Cleaners and their operation there in the Villa Edgeo neighborhood down the street from Belmont had pumped tetrachloroethylene into the groundwater for years as waste, and that groundwater is now moving slowly toward the Cumberland River. The next site you expect to see it is under Music Row. When they redeveloped Whiteway Cleaners, they cleaned up the groundwater under the building, but the neighborhood groundwater was not cleaned up. So overall, we want to maintain a healthy home, and we need to avoid sources of nitrogen dioxide. So when you burn natural gas in the home without adequate ventilation, you are going to generate nitrogen dioxide, which has a host of health issues. And my friend Kimberly Jackson of Hyde here locally has done a great job of going into the home in some of the lower resourced areas and measuring levels of things like nitrogen dioxide and volatile organic compounds and mold, and found significant levels in, say, some of the public housing areas and also some other low-income areas. She had the equipment and went in and did a really good indoor air study, and that can be a presentation itself. Particulate matter in the home is very important. And one thing to note is some of these electric air purifiers actually generate particulate matter. Burning candles generates particulate matter. So they may smell good burning candles, but you're generating particulate matter, which can have cardiovascular and respiratory impacts. So you should be move forward, mold cleanup in your home for a small area, 3 feet by 3 feet. You can clean this yourself. Larger areas, you should turn that over to a professional. The EPA has a site which gives you certified disinfectant. It's a really good site for things like COVID. And you should look at their tips for using disinfectant safely. Basically, you want to use your gloves, etc. And when you safely handle those, safely dispose of any waste, and safely, make sure pets and kids are not exposed to those. Hand washing, which we push for COVID, is also really good for reducing exposure and spread of toxic materials. And climate change has not been our friend in terms of spreading toxics, because here you see the forest fires, which are spreading particulate pollution across the nation. And the EPA's, well, here's a picture here, and you can see the size of these small diameter particles that are being generated in these wildfires, and that can get deep into your lungs and not only affect your respiratory system, but your cardiovascular system. This big thing here is a human hair. So you can see the comparison. And dust, pollen, and mold is like less than 10 microns, but this PM 2.5, the small particles we see coming out of these wildfires, gets deep into your system. If you go to the Air Now EPA site, you can track the quality of the air in your location. If you track right now in San Francisco, you can see there's a lot of yellow there, even though the fires are miles away. And in Nashville, when the haze showed up here, thanks to the jet stream, we ended up in the orange category. So wildfires, even in the West, impacted air quality here in Nashville. So another thing is floods, and here's the recent flood in Louisiana. We had, which surprised everybody, the flooded basements in New York and New Jersey. People never thought about basements being flooded and flash floods. But those floods bring a lot of toxic materials into your home and your property. So you got to address these things as the toxic substances that they are. The EPA has some really good resources for flood cleanup. And the thing is, if flood water in your house creates mold, and that leads to unhealthy air as well. So you got to treat that. And hard surfaces you can clean, but things like couches and other items like that, soft surfaces, you're going to have to just throw them away. Remember that September is Preparedness Month, being prepared for disaster emergencies, and you should share with your family ways that they can reduce their risk from contamination, leaks, spills, hazardous materials, and other dangers. And what we encourage is family preparedness, sitting down with your family, making a plan for reducing your family's exposure to toxic materials and their preparedness for disasters. And then also within your local community, you want to push community preparedness also. And what the most important thing we found in these disasters is neighbors helping neighbors. So this is a good way to draw this to a conclusion in terms of family preparedness and community preparedness to address these disasters and how people can work together to help each other. I want to acknowledge the Midwest Consortium, through which I did get funding from the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, Workers' Health and Safety Program. This Midwest Consortium for over 30 years was headquartered at the University of Cincinnati, led by Carol Rice, who retired. And now it's moved to the University of Minnesota. And Pete Raynard there is the PI. And I want to thank them for their support. And I've been actually working with this group over the last 20 years. So now I'll take any questions and thank you for participating.
Typed into the chat, you had mentioned that the coating for nonstick pans was a toxin, and I'm wondering how that is it from using the pans, or is it from making them, or how does that work?
Yeah, a lot of that contamination is due to the processing of the material, developing the material. And, you know, the use has not been a greater source of contamination as the manufacturing. And then also firefighting foams containing that material has been a real source. They found a lot around military installations also. Okay.
Yeah, because you do hear about, you know, not using certain pans because they give off something into the food or something. And I was not sure about that, or if there's some that are better than others. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that, you know, these things do wear out, you know, and trying to keep, you know, these pans intact and not flaking and, you know, chipping, you know, may be a challenge, but it's there. Okay, and so flaking and chipping with wear could possibly expose you to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you know, I can't say it's a major source, but clearly, you know, these things do wear. Okay, but the major way is through, you know, manufacturing and the use of firefighting foams and things like that. But there, I would rule out some exposure. The good thing about the CDC's report is they actually get blood and urine from a wide variety of people, okay? And they found it in their blood and urine, okay? So it's getting into human bodies.
Robert, you mentioned mercury in fish. Which ones are bad and which ones are better?
I would say that, you know, here's the thing. The bottom feeders, like the big carp and catfish, you know, they tend to be the ones that, you know, accumulate a lot of these toxins, okay? I would say that, you know, my mother wasn't the world's greatest educated person, but she had mother wit, and she listened to the people that, you know, her, you know, ancestors. So I remember this day, my father brought this 50-pound carp home from the Cumberland River, and we were all excited because he had this 50-pound carp. I didn't know anything about carp being bottom feeders at the time, but my mother was smart enough to know that you cut away the fat, okay, where these toxins accumulate, and you essentially are filleting the fish. And we ate it. I'm still here today. And we now, you know, in our training with people in terms of how to address the fish, we talk about filleting the fish and cutting away this fat part where the toxins accumulate.
Can you talk a little bit more about bleach? Many people use bleach when they're cleaning their clothes to get it extra white, to get rid of mold. Most people use bleach to get rid of mold. So how is that affecting people, and what is a good substitute for removing mold specifically? Because that seems to be like a standard.
Yeah, well, you notice in those instructions there, they don't really push the bleach. They just promote other good cleaning agents, and they don't really push bleach as much. If you read, you know, EPA guidelines and CDC guidelines. If you do use bleach, you need to do it with significant ventilation and use it with gloves, etc. But it seems like if you have a really good detergent, etc., with some abrasive power, that you can, remove these small amounts of mold. All right. But large amounts, you should, and turn it over to a professional.
Okay, thank you.
Stephanie, I used to be a buyer for a retail company here in town, and there's a product called mold control. And a friend of mine that used to work with me went to work as a sales rep, and he represented a product called, believe it or not, mold control. And the way that when you use bleach on the spores of mold, it exacerbates the product or the problem, and they create more spores. But the mold control, and I can't think of the company that manufactures it, but it's available from Home Depot, wraps around the spore and doesn't let it grow.
Okay, good to know. I will. You may want to put that in the chat for anyone else who wants to use that as a substitute for bleach.
Robert, I want to thank you for all of your research and work on this. In listening, it's kind of overwhelming the amount of education that's needed, even for people who want to be aware of what to do or what not to do, even for the simple thing of bleach or not bleach. And the fact that corporations are continuing to manufacture and produce things that are toxic because they don't want to not do it, just like the fossil fuel companies want to continue producing energy through fossil fuel. And so what is your projection about the ability of a large enough population of people to become aware enough to make a difference?
Well, I think that's what we've been working on over the years. And it's not going to happen right away, okay? But we're going to have to continue to educate, especially the more vulnerable communities, all right? And we're going to have to pull together as a community. That's why I said, in terms of the community, it's people helping each other. I know that, I and Dan Jurenko, who's, one of my colleagues on the executive committee here, we were on the energy subcommittee of the mayor of Nashville's advisory committee for developing a sustainability plan for Nashville. And so, like one of the things that, we was pushing there, and you realize the need to, because TVA, as we all know, everybody's up to this, wants to lock in places like Nashville to 20-year contracts, with, their energy sources. And, that's in Nashville, that's predominantly fossil fuels, okay? So, gathering, city power to fight back against, TDA's insistence that, you gotta sign this contract, be locked into this for 20 years. We need to be able to increase the percent of renewable energy sources significantly if we're going to, get significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in Nashville by 2040. So we just got to, mount together as a community and push back, okay? And even, as a city, and you can do it as a neighborhood and community. There are some, less resource communities, and I think you've done this in like the West Holland, the WEAC area where Peggy Shepard is a lead there. They're doing neighborhood solar, okay, in a low resourced area. Matter of fact, they had the Secretary of Energy visited them recently because of this neighborhood solar that they were doing. And that has another benefit, because you can teach workers, guys in this neighborhood, how to install the solar panels So that gives them jobs. All right. And then in addition, you're transitioning this neighborhood away from fossil fuels to solar fuel. And one of the things that Dan and I talked about, and we did it on this energy subcommittee, was energy justice. Okay. Because people who don't have much money, people who are trying to make it less than $1,000 a month, all right, don't have money for huge utility bills. All right, so you need to find ways that they can meet their energy needs in an economic fashion. Okay, right now in North Nashville, you can hardly find any place that rents for $1,000 a month or less. Yet there's some people that have Social Security that's less than $1,000 a month. So energy justice, if you look at New Orleans sustainability plan, one of the features I really liked about their plan was this whole approach to energy justice, to make sure that the energy burden was not that great on people with limited resources.
I have a question about regulation, I guess. How did this get so bad? I was under the naive notion that in the 70s with the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act, and it looks like they've completely left regulations, or they're not researching these products before they put them out. Can you comment?
Well, I think that you have to recognize, I'll be honest for full transparency, after I got my PhD in chemistry, the first 5 years I spent at Dow Chemical, okay? So I've seen this thing from the inside out, okay? And the reality is Dow was good because we actually did address the environmental impact of the processes that we used, and also the impact on all populations. But what for years wasn't done was studying the developmental impact. And that's why you see the TSCA regulations, et cetera, was they wanted to address, when you get exposed to these commercial products, how does it affect the developing child? Okay, or how does it affect this child that is in the womb, So for years, we did not look at that. And that allowed a lot of things to get out there into commerce. And so many things, we just missed the boat. Like even with the nanomaterials now, people are into industrial hygiene, et cetera, realize that, we've almost missed the boat on that, because now they're widespread out there, many good uses, but some not so good uses. So the due diligence is still yet to come, and it's a lot of work that's got to be done. But over the last 30 years, I can say we've made some progress.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you speak about radon? I know that I'm a real estate affiliate broker, and Nashville area and beyond is a real red hotspot for radon. And I always have my clients test the homes that they're going to buy for radon, and it can be mitigated. But even I myself lived in my home for years before I really heard of it. And when I finally got it tested, there was radon in certain areas, but you can get it mitigated for, depending on the size of the home, anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500. But that, again, is pretty expensive for some people. And probably a lot of people are living with radon, or certainly if you're renting, you have no idea. Do you know what the effects of that? Does that cause lung cancer? What is?
Yeah, it definitely is a cancer causing agent. And I think what we got to do is we just got to inform more people, spread the word. Like what Kimberly was doing was going into these homes in low income areas like the Casey Housing Project and some in North Nashville, and helping these people, measure these and then realize, how this had to be addressed. But it is an issue. You just got to get the word out and the test strips to people and work with people. TDEC has been, a source of, radon test kits. Back when, I live here in Southeast Nashville, and they used to have that Babies R Us there on Noblesville Road near Hickory Boulevard. Not that I have any young kids or not, but I took a few other people shopping there. But they did have the radon test kits that you could get there. And I used to get some there and distribute it to people in the community. And you want to work with them so they can assess the cleanup. If it's a rent-occupied property, then you got to work with the landlord to get that mitigated. And as you said, it can be mitigated, but it does cost. But people need to know whether or not they are exposed, and those test kits are available.
If you've been living in your home for a long time and you don't know, it's pretty prudent to test for radon and get it mitigated if there is radon.
Oh yeah, definitely, because it is a source of cancer. And like you said, it's here underground in Middle Tennessee.
So we do have a question that Robert wanted to present to everyone to see if they've been paying attention. So so I'm going to share my screen. Does everyone see? Which screen do you see?
Reducing your family's exposure to toxic substances. Okay. Interactive Q&A.
Okay, so here's our question for today. This is a multiple choice question. You can choose any of these. Just go ahead and put your answers in the chat. Normally we do a poll, but we want to keep it up on the screen for a little bit. So we want you to list all the possible sources listed below of toxic substances that have been already discussed that may exist in your community. So 1, hazardous waste site, brown fields, power plants, hospitals, contaminated waterways, water treatment plants, manufacturing facilities, agricultural operations, recycling operations, waste treatment operations, and water service lines and petroleum extraction operations. So go ahead and put your answers in the chat.
What defines a community in terms of the region or the how much around it? I mean, are we talking about separate sections of Nashville, or are we talking about all of Nashville or all of Middle Tennessee? What defines a community, the area of a community?
I would think the area which is in close proximity to where you live. A smaller division is your zip code, and an even smaller division is your neighborhood. So, zip codes are easy because, like when you do the TRI, you could zero in on 37208 to 37209. I live in 37211, which is a smaller area than Nashville itself. So try your zip code, for example. That's a way to start.
Okay, we're getting some great answers.
All right, I can't type in my chat for some reason.
Wow.
Gary, do you want to see if you can, maybe it's some setting that's associated to her?
Oh, don't worry about it, Gary.
Did you bring up the chat, Barbara?
Yeah, I haven't, but when I type, it makes a little ding sound, so it must be something on my line. But don't worry, I'm enjoying this. I think it's everything but 10.
I think it's interesting. I think every single It's the various combinations of answers. So
You were talking about the water wells, and so I thought that might be under water service line, although it's probably not a line.
So I'm going to put the answers up here. Can you see the chat screen when I post it up here, or does it show up on the screen share?
You can see the chat screen.
Okay. I think all of them. We have grouped them. It's interesting because all of you have grouped them in various ways. I don't think there's anything that's really missing. So Robert, do you want to, is this a general question specifically to our community, to the community? Like all of these provide toxic substances, but not all of them are in every single community.
Not all are in every community, but clearly, you know, there are various combinations in different communities. And what you want to do is just sort of, you know, work together in your community to address some of those, make sure people in your community are aware of that and take steps to reduce their exposure, okay? So that I think it says that, you know, there's work, and that's again, community preparedness, neighbor helping neighbor. And, you know, that's what happened, like, you know, a lot of Beverly Wright's work at the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice has been in Cancer Alley, which is that area between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And I'll have to cite one example that occurred there. There was this one community, which on one side of it was a Shell refinery. On the other side of it was a Shell plant that generated toxic emissions. And so that community, you know, really ended up fighting, took on Shell. It took Shell all the way to the Netherlands to fight for their community to reduce emissions. So, you know, if these people in this small community in Louisiana could do that, that says that clearly, you know, you can organize and do something in your community. And I never forget standing there in that community, they told the story of this guy who was out cutting his grass, and these flammable vapors from the Shell factory across the street ignited a fire, which burned part of his home.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, we talk about, you know, dealing with emissions from nearby facilities. That's real. And so a lot of environmental justice work has been done with communities addressing the industries nearby. Okay.
Well, also, Joanne, you said the lawn and garden chemicals, and that really should be mentioned because those green lawn things are terrible. They kill so many of our beneficial bugs and things like that. And the spraying for mosquitoes is so toxic. There are other methods to control mosquitoes. If you just put an outdoor fan in your backyard, wherever you're sitting or whatever, make sure you don't have standing water around, put up bat houses and keep some wild areas, and just do not spray for mosquitoes. Someone in our neighborhood found, because we have turtles, and they found a turtle who's almost dead and their eyes were swollen, and it was just spraying this stuff and putting the green lawn and the weed and feed and stuff like that. Weeds are beautiful. They are. Dandelions are beautiful. So just avoid using all that stuff.
And I'll cite Rita's work too in Memphis there, because at the time she was publishing a newsletter which showed all the toxic materials that was being released in the various neighborhoods in Memphis. so people were aware and could take steps to reduce their exposure.
So we have a few more questions here. We're going to move on to what you can do. If you have additional questions after the recording, you can go ahead and ask them to Robert. But he has some questions for you, and usually in the what you can do. So we have 3 questions that we're going to ask you, and if you can put them in the chat, or if you want to just verbally say it, you can. What steps can I take or you take to reduce your family's exposure to toxic substances at home?
One thing is to buy locally organic made vegetables and food.
Good point.
I would think to you, it's a spray that I use to clean my fruit and all my vegetables. Every time I go to the grocery store, I buy this spray, and it's called Fit Organic. It's for fruit and it's a vegetable wash, and it's USDA or approved and organic, and it cleans your vegetables. And so it's that's what I would use or tell someone to use to help to get rid of a lot of the toxic exposure in the foods that you eat.
That's great.
It's 98%. Is a Fit Organic will get your fruit and vegetables cleaner by removing 98% more chemicals and wax than water.
Alice, do you want to go ahead and put that in the chat for everyone so they have it?
Sure.
Okay.
It would be interesting to know what is in it.
Yeah. So one of the things I've done is I wash my floors with hot water only. And sometimes if it's really dirty, then I'll put vinegar in it. But I don't use any of the other types of cleaners anymore. Vinegar is an amazing substance and it's very natural, and it will cleans very well. It smells a little bit initially when you do it, but that dissipates within 2 minutes. I mean, really, it doesn't last very long. So vinegar, white vinegar and hot water does an amazing job.
Mm-hmm.
It's great on windows too, and lower your consumption of meat, which puts so many toxins into our environment.
Yes.
Especially pork and the farming of pigs is terrible and probably not good for your health to eat either. There's bacon. Bacon isn't bad.
Yes, it is.
And I always say only eat eggs from pasture-raised chickens for your health, and to avoid factory farming as well. Cage-free eggs aren't good enough. It just means their cage is only is bigger, and they still melt off their beaks, and it's a torturous thing. So, and spray antibiotics in the air. So if you get your eggs from farms or almost any place, Kroger or anything has pasture-raised chicken eggs. They taste better and they're much better for you, and they're much better for the environment.
What kind of eggs that you mentioned did you say were better?
Pasture-raised. In other words, the chickens are running around in a pasture.
Okay.
There's cage-free, and you think, oh, that's good, they're cage-free. All that means is the cage is bigger. They still melt off their toes and their beaks and things like that, and they spray antibiotics in the air. So you want to eat eggs from chickens that aren't stressed out in a tiny environment and sprayed antibiotics, and then just food shortages, everything. It takes so much water to raise one cow. It's absolutely incredible. So if you can lower your consumption of of meat, especially pork, and I think for your health and the eggs, pasture. Really, every place has them. Walmart has them, I think.
Antoinette, I want to sum up what you were talking about. I remember I met an old preacher one time. He said, Robert, I don't want to eat no chicken whose feet never touch the ground.
It's true. It's true. I mean, can you imagine eating something that's been stressed out, like veal, or hogs can't even turn around in their pen their whole life?
Oh my.
You don't think that stress of that animal and that unhealthiness of those animals isn't transferred into your body, you know? And if nothing else, think of the torture they're going through, and also just the excrement of these animals and the gases they produce is just terrible for our environment. So think of that too.
So another suggestion is to reduce toxins would be to open your windows, let fresh air. Just and that's a simple one. Just open your windows more often. I think people just don't open because you know they have air conditioning, or if they have heat. I mean, there's plenty of time. At least in Tennessee, our temperatures aren't excessively drastic, except for certain times of the year, like 1 month in the 1 or 2 months in the winter, 1 or 2 months in the summer. But you'll always get a few days that are just the perfect day. Make sure you open your windows during those days.
I would like to open my windows, but they're still building where I am, and it affects my asthma, the dust.
Oh yeah.
I would love to open up my windows.
Yeah.
Any suggestions on water filter systems that we should get? Because I live in an old house. I've tried to remove all of the old pipes, but it's Nashville, and I know there's old piping that comes to my house, and you know the city takes time. So is there, Robert, do you have any suggestion on good water filtration systems that you should get for your house?
No, I don't know any specific ones that I could recommend. I just would say that, you know, one of the ingredients that has been shown to be very effective is, you know, things that contain some activated charcoal plus other elements. But, you know, that does have a significant impact. But they have, you know, I'm not familiar with, you know, detailed ones that I could recommend.
Okay.
They're out there. You need to carefully research those.
Okay.
Stephanie, I think your Berkey is probably the best one there is as far as filtration. My whole house is filtered through a big filter, and then I use a pure water filter, which I also want to highly recommend to using a water purifier like that. I just put it right in from the tap, and I don't use the plastic bottles. I don't have to buy all those plastic bottles that are getting into our environment as well. And I have given them to friends as gifts for Christmas, and one of them said it's the best gift they ever got, because I was at their house and they'd always be buying these big plastic jugs over and over, and all these plastic bottles, and it's much more healthy for you and for our environment.
It's true. And I do love my Berkey. The water tastes wonderful after it gets through it. They're a little bit pricey, but you never have to change the filters. You just have to clean the filters. So it'll last forever. Really.
Those are spelled, how do you spell those again? If people want to look them up.
I don't know. Well, you know, now I think about it, I'm not sure. I think I'll look it up.
I think it's Berkee or something like that.
You were right, Stephanie. Berkey.
I got it right?
Yeah, you did, Stephanie. It's I just looked it up.
Those are really good.
Do you have to worry with that one about blue-green algae when that's a problem in your area with it going through your filter, or is it handled that adequately?
It's supposed to clean like 98% of all toxins out of your water. So you should research it. I've never heard of that as being an issue, but definitely do your own research on it. I'm not an expert in water filtration system. This is my experience with one filter, which I have appreciated. You know, And I enjoy that. The water tastes really good once it's done. Nashville water doesn't taste that great. So I know I definitely know that it's filtering out a considerable amount of the water, and it takes forever for it to work. So you have to get a big enough one where you can just throw it in there and by the next morning you'll have water. It takes a long time for it to filter.
Michael and Trish, you say reversed osmosis water you get from water distributors is good. How do you bring your jug in and fill it up, or how do you get that?
Well, we've saved. Yeah, you bring your own containers. So for us, we used to buy
distilled
water. So we saved the bottles, the gallons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And or you can have also those big like you have in the offices, like water distributors.
The 5 gallons.
The 5 gallons.
But those are hard to manipulate. So you just take your 1 gallon jugs. They're like the milk carton size, only they contained water in them, to places that have one of the osmosis machines.
Yeah.
Like Publix has machines like that, and
Walmart, I think.
Sprouts has it.
Great. Okay.
And it's 35 cents a gallon.
Yeah, and you can buy either it's either a 1 gallon size or 5 gallons. What is it? The 5 gallon size?
Yeah, I would not suggest the bigger sizes because it's too hard,
heavy
to carry.
Yeah.
So what we do is we just get an empty cart and put all our empty our empty jugs in there and take it up to the machine and fill them up.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
Well, they don't have to be brand new water cut, you just get
It's a machine.
From your own, you're using your own jug. So you're responsible for cleaning, your own jug. You just put it under the spout, put your 35 cents or whatever it is. Usually it's 35 cents.
Okay.
Per gallon. And that's what the jugs that we have are gallon jugs.
Yeah, and reverse osmosis is it's not going to clean chemicals, but it does remove a lot of material stuffs, and the water is very good. It tastes very good.
RO water is very tasty. One of the things you need to be careful about is using milk jugs and distilled water jugs, because those will leach plastic into the water over time. So the jugs that they sell like at Whole Foods and the produce place are pricey, but they don't leach. So
okay, good point, Gary. Thank you, Gary. That's a good point.
Well, Robert, do you have? So we have several questions we need to get through. So let's.
I think that the hour's pretty far spent, so I think we can stop at this one.
Okay, let's move
give people a break, because they've been engaged in everything, and you could just put them on the screen, and they got some things that they could work on at home, etc. Just questions for thought, and things that you can think about and work on from this point on.
Okay.
And if you ever want, more discussion, you can always feel free to contact me. If you have a group and you want me to come out and talk to them, be virtually with them, I'd be happy to lead a discussion. If
I
you
do.
get a group together.
I have a group, Dr. Winfield.
All right.
I have a ministry on End It Now. It's ending abuse of every kind.
Mm-hmm.
And when you mentioned about how the environmental justice, oh my goodness, uh, I never knew about environmental justice. How does that fit in with being abused?
How does it fit in with what?
How does that fit in about being abused? Is that would be considered some type of abuse or violence? How would that fit in the as far as environmental justice is concerned?
And abuse?
Yes. Would that be some type of abuse by the system or what?
Oh yeah, clearly.
Okay.
It is. It's like, you know, the idea of what the institutional racism that we talk about.
Okay.
I mean, that has existed for years.
Yeah.
Just the way that it was, and people just accepted that as the way that it was. See, the whole thing is until, you know, like Bob Bullock and others came out with this idea about environmental justice, the focus was mainly on the birds and the trees and everything. And then once Bob Bullock came out with looking at the health impacts as a result of these environmental exposures, then it opened up this whole new dialogue. And actually, Bob now has written like 18 books related to environmental justice. And so what you can follow some of his work, started out with Dumping in Dixie and went on through today, but it's institutionalized. Okay.
I see. Yeah.
I mean, you think about, you know, they were cleaning up that coal ash in East Tennessee. Okay. People were not forthcoming in terms of protecting the workers. They were telling us, okay, you know, hey, you don't have to worry about this coal ash isn't toxic. You look at it, you know, all these toxic materials are in it, but they allow workers to clean it up, right? And I would love to get a profile of the community down either Alabama or Mississippi where they buried that stuff. What would that community say if it had a voice in terms of where that coal ash was buried? So, you know, these major corporations and even smaller businesses have been doing business as usual unless you call their attention to it. So
you're not going to see a landfill in Green Hills, or even a suggestion that it's going to be put there. So,
or Bellmead.
Huh?
Or Bellmead.
Or Bellmead. You're right. They go into other, they go into other communities that can't fight.
Well, you talk about something is wrong. Nashville is a city of 600,000 people, and they put all their trash in a hole in the ground in Rutherford County. Right?
It's true.
Is that fair?
Well, Dr. Wingfield, how can I get in touch with you?
Okay. Why don't you put your contact information in the chat?
Yes, sir.
And I'll put mine in there too. Okay.
So this next question is, what are the steps that you can take to reduce your community's exposure to toxic substances? So Robert, can you just give some suggestions for everyone, like 1 or 2 suggestions? We won't open it up unless someone wants to type it into the chat, because we have another one and then we have several more slides that we want to go through. Any suggestions at the top of your?
It goes back to the illustrations that I gave earlier of communities mobilizing to reduce exposure to toxics in their community. So it's sort of like not being afraid to take on major industries that may be polluting your community. Or here's something very simple. We know that floods, spread a lot of toxic things, right?
Yes.
Something you could do in your community is to reduce flooding is actually go out and clean all of the storm drains and in your community with a simple step. You could help, neighbors who might need help in terms of planting gardens and other things that may reduce some flooding in their area. you know, I think that we need to just look locally at what we can do, and inform neighbors of things like we had today, sharing information with your neighbors, because many of us have neighborhood associations, and that's a good way you can reach a lot of people to talk about things you can do in your neighborhood to reduce exposure. So use the neighborhood association routes, because we've got some very active ones. And there's a neighborhood resource center, which provides a lot of information to these neighborhood groups, and work with those groups to address these exposures in your neighborhood.
Very good points.
My chat
Sure.
isn't working, Dr. Wingfield, but it's called Neighbor to Neighbor.
Oh yeah, that it got a new name.
And
Right? Yeah.
N to N.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
I've really enjoyed this, but I have to go. But thank you. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the last question was steps you want to reduce to exposure to toxic substances in the workplace.
I think you just want to communicate with your fellow workers there and do some assessment. There is what they call a risk assessment now that you can do. So it's like identifying the hazard that does exist, then what are the risks as a result of that hazard, and then look at how you can minimize the risk, okay, and then take the needed action. So you can do a kind of this hazard assessment on operations in your workplace and involve your fellow workers and sit around and talk about what can we do different to reduce the risk that we face.
Right. Okay.
And one thing is everybody that should have access to a material data safety sheet, which describes all of the hazards and risks of the chemicals that they work with in your environment. And OSHA requires that all workers make those available. I mean, all employers make those available to all workers. So even if you're a janitor, you should know the hazards of the chemicals that you use.
That's right.
The employer has a responsibility to do that.
So Robert has also provided some web links for you to do additional research. I'm going to post them in to the chat for everyone. So just copy those and put them in your so you can refer to it later. Robert, I don't know if there's any one of these that you want to highlight, if you can.
I think they're all good. So
Okay.
just, pick one and start the process.
Okay, so I put them out there in the chat. You can make sure you copy and paste this before you leave the session, because you won't have them after that unless you want to go to the recording, which will probably be a week or so before it's posted. Okay. One other thing that that we've added to this program, I'm going to try to concentrate on this every month, is come up with a documentary to talk about climate change. I just recently saw this one. It is a 2021 documentary by David Attenborough. It's fantastic. It explains in detail the crisis that we're going through right now and why we have all these wildfires going off and the flooding and the major storms. We are destroying our world. So please, you can see this on Netflix. It's not a boring documentary. It's fascinating. They've done a great job in highlighting all the areas that need to be corrected, and some of the areas that may have gone past the breaking point. So that's what they're going to explain. So please, if you get a chance, it's not, if you have Netflix, then it's a free documentary for you to watch. Okay.
Thank you.
I'd like to give Sierra Club a plug for, they've been instrumental in closing a lot of coal plants, and we're continuing to do that with our Beyond Coal campaign. So supporting and being part of Sierra Club is a good thing.
It's true. Okay, so next month we have this program every month. It is the second Thursday of every month. So next month is October 14th. You can find out what that program is. We will post it on email. We send out regular newsletters if you are a member of Sierra Club, and it'll be posted on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It is not completely set what that program will be, but you'll get an announcement soon on that. So just stay aware. And for our closing thought, regarding reducing your family's toxic exposure, our executive committee chairman, Antoinette Olison, will give you a closing thought. So here you go, Antoinette.
The closing thought is, I have to look for it.
It's on the screen.
Oh, it's on the screen. That is the closing thought. We tried to figure out who was the author of this. What you can't see can hurt you. And I couldn't figure that out. There are a lot of things out there that refer to this statement. So if anyone knows that or can find out the author.
I'd vote for Rachel Carson.
Why?
Oh, she was one of the first people to bring awareness about some of this stuff.
Okay.
That could be. Yeah, lots of names came up like that when I was trying to find out the author. But bottom line, it's a good statement, and I think that Robert's done a great job of showing us a lot of things that we can be aware of. And a couple of months ago, we had a program on electric vehicles. That's another thing too. If you can switch to an electric vehicle, or at least a hybrid, that would be another good thing.
And stop using carbon fuels.
Yeah.
So it's best to get an electric car. It's best to purchase an electric car.
It is.
Yes. Or someone else told me, since they're making such leaps and bounds of making them better and better, it might be a good thing to lease one. Buying one.
Yeah.
And so you have that, and as they get perfected, then at some point you can buy one. And there are jobs for leasing a car. So I thought that was a really good idea. If you're kind of wondering, like, well, maybe it's too early to get one, that might be something to look into.
Thank you.
Antoinette, I had thought on these electric cars. You know, the electric engine is more efficient than, the internal combustion one. But if you really want to make a difference, you should use a solo charging station. Because if you bring the car home and you plug it into the grid, which is highly powered by fossil fuels,
Yes, good point.
You're not having the ultimate impact. So you're helping some, but I would suggest using solar charging stations to the extent that you could.
Another suggestion is live close to where you work so you don't have to drive, work remotely so you don't have to drive, reduce the amount of driving that you do. Well, I think America drives more. I mean, we're a vast country, and all of our cities and towns, and you have to have a car to survive. You really do. And that has to change. That if you go to Europe, you can walk to a train station. You can walk to a grocery store. It's scary to walk anywhere in Nashville. Not built. It is not built to walk. You're walking right in the middle of the streets. There's barely any sidewalks, and then
Right.
it's
people
and then
will hit you.
it's ridiculous. So for a city our size, we have terrible public transportation. So anyway.
No, but
All
if
right.
you live like in my area, I'd have to walk 3 miles to get anywhere.
You
Get a
would.
bus station or
So-
anything or store, and we don't want sidewalks. No, we're rural over here in West.
It just
Pete.
needs to be designed better. Anyway, so
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that all of you spent the last 2 hours with us.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
So we learned so much. Thank you so much, Robert, for sharing and putting together this extremely informative deck on toxic waste throughout our environment. We truly appreciate all the information you collected and shared with us. Make sure, I hope the people who are left, I hope you do copy the links and do some research and make your world safer and your family's world safer. So,
I hope I'm able to copy that. I've never experienced how to copy something from
just
a website.
go to the chat, go to the
Yeah.
chat box, click into it, the one that I had, and just highlight everything.
Oh.
And then
Okay.
just click the right button.
Oh, I see.
And then
There is an easier way.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, you can click on the 3 dots on the right.
Yes, I got
and
it.
you save the chat.
Yes, that's right. Thank you for both.
And it will
How did I
save
never
it,
know that?
it will save it in a Zoom folder with the
Okay.
date.
Okay, well, great.
Thank you.
We need to
Doing
take
as we
that
speak.
with us everywhere.
I will have to put that in the next, I will make sure that's in the next presentation.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, both of you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. And if you want, we can stay a little bit later and chat. But if not, thanks for coming.
Okay.